My name's Kevin, and I'm in my 30s from Denver, Colorado. I mention that up front because, honestly, I get super annoyed when folks tell their stories without first introducing themselves, so I figure I'll just put it all out there early. Back in the spring of late 2018, I had been living with a girl named Rachel for about 2 years. She was hands down one of the easiest roommates I'd ever had to deal with. We met through a mutual friend when I first moved into Denver, and I was scraping for any place to stay. Rachel had a spare room and a rent that she couldn't cover solo, so we made a deal. She was just 27, only a year older than me, but she seemed to carry this sense of worldly wisdom and maturity that made that tiny two-bedroom apartment feel way more like a real home. She was an artist in her free time, and she was genuinely talented, always doodling things in her sketchbook: birds, vines, intricate spirals. And she also had a cool, eclectic style when it came to decorating the place. She wasn't much of a party girl either, which was really a relief since my job at a coffee shop meant early mornings. I'd get up at 5 o'clock a.m., and I'd keep the coffee pot warm for her before I headed out. Our lives just kind of synced up without us really talking about it, creating this quiet, mutual rhythm. One day in April 2018, Rachel sat me down at our kitchen table with this excited look in her eyes and told me she was heading down to Bolivia for 2 weeks. Her eyes sparkled as she explained she was going on an ayahuasca retreat. She literally described it like she was already there, as if she'd seen the magic firsthand. At the time, I didn't really know what ayahuasca was, just sounded like some yoga or spiritual thing, so I just smiled and said that sounded incredible. About a week later, she packed her bags, waved goodbye from the window, and took off. I caught her taxi at the curb, wishing her safe travels, and figured she'd come back with a cool story or maybe a weird souvenir or two. That night alone, I looked up ayahuasca on my laptop. Turns out, it's this hallucinogenic tea used in rituals in places like Peru or Brazil. People drink it with shamans, vomit for hours, and then claim to see visions of gods, demons, or some wild stuff inside their minds. Folks say it can break you open emotionally, releasing parts of your soul, or give you some kind of spiritual awakening. Big, dramatic stuff. Honestly, I wasn't into that scene. I prefer my reality straightforward, feet firmly planted on the ground. But for Rachel, she was the spiritual type, always chasing some higher meaning with tarot cards, little quartz crystals on her sill, or that vibe she got from her meditation apps. I lay in bed imagining her coming back with a tan and talking to jaguar spirits or some other mysterious creature. She always dove headfirst into those adventures, and I figured she'd be back with some crazy stories. When she returned, she texted me saying she was about to grab a cab from the airport. An hour later, the door creaked open, and in she strolled, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. I expected her to look glowing, relaxed, maybe a little tanner with a bright smile. But instead, she looked exhausted. Her hair was a tangled mess, unwashed, and her skin looked pale, almost like the sun hadn't touched her for those 2 weeks. I asked if she had a good trip, and she didn't even smile, just dropped her bag by the door and looked at me like I wasn't even there, more like I was just background noise. Her voice was flat and distant when she said it was intense. Then she shuffled into her room and shut the door behind her. That was my first real sign something was off. Rachel had always been super social, the kind of person who'd plop down next to me and talk about her day at the bookstore or the latest drawing she was working on. But after Bolivia, she was different, distant, quiet. I told myself she was maybe just tired, exhausted from jet lag or something, but figured she'd bounce back in a few days. I did some quick Googling, and yeah, those retreats can be tough. I read about the purging, hours of vomiting and feeling like your mind's unraveling. No wonder she looked shell-shocked. She probably just needed time to adjust, so I gave her space. But days went by and she didn't get better. A week passed and she still kept to herself, only answering me with short, clipped responses. Her sketches disappeared from the fridge. The plants I watered while she was gone started to wilt, but she seemed oblivious. I started worrying, had she gotten some bad news down there? Maybe things had gone seriously wrong. When I asked her about it, she refused to talk. Just told me she didn't want to. I figured, okay, she's probably just overwhelmed and she'll come out of it soon enough. I thought a few days more and she'd be fine. But I was wrong. Things only got weirder. Rachel was always a vegetarian. She loved to cook healthy stuff. Stir-fries with peppers and tofu, big salads with nuts sprinkled on top, always bowls of fresh fruit on the counter. I loved living with someone who shared my interest in clean eating. But then, less than 2 weeks after her Bolivia trip, I started noticing raw beef turning up in the fridge. I remember the first time I saw it, I froze thinking to myself, I don't remember buying ground beef. Then I realized it was hers. I actually gasped out loud. I never thought she'd start eating raw meat. When I asked her why she suddenly changed her diet, her tone was flat. She shrugged and said, "Time for a change." That was so unlike her. I started to really worry, but then I saw what she did with it. She didn't cook it. She ate it raw, straight from her hands, late at night. One night I woke up feeling thirsty, and as I walked through the apartment, I heard the fridge door creak open. It was nearly 3 a.m., and I peered into the dimly lit kitchen, moonlight filtering through the blinds, creating a pattern of shadows on the floor. There, standing at the window, was Rachel, just staring up at the moon. I froze, watching her silently until she swayed a little and then quickly backed away and hurried back to my room. I was hesitant, but I asked her in the morning if she was okay. She told me she was fine, her words hollow, her tone distant. I convinced myself she just needed more time to recover, and that's what I kept telling myself. But things only got stranger from there. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the kitchen making toast when I heard a crunch behind me. Turning around, I saw Rachel sitting at the table, a mason jar in front of her, filled with live crickets. I froze. Her fingers reached in and plucked out one, then Popsh ate it. I felt faint, clutching my butter knife, stomach twisting. I quickly turned back to my toast, smeared butter on it, and left like nothing was wrong. But then, days later, I caught her eating shiny black beetles standing by the sink, gagging as I watched her sink her teeth into them. When I demanded to know what was happening, she swallowed and told me she learned some things about herself in Bolivia, decided to change her diet, and if I didn't want to join her new eating habits, that was fine. It was unsettling. Her tone was so calm, almost resigned. Seeing Rachel act even remotely confrontational wasn't her style, and it freaked me out. The apartment started feeling like her domain, not ours anymore. Her room radiated a strange, earthy smell, damp soil, rotting stuff, and she stopped showering. Her hair got greasy, knotted. Clothes hung off her frame, and she was losing weight rapidly. I wanted to ask what she saw down there in the jungle or what was haunting her, but every time I tried, something stopped me. I even started locking my bedroom door, a flimsy door, sure, but enough for me to feel a little safer. I'd lie awake, listening, my phone hidden under my pillow, and work kept me distracted. I'd stay late at the coffee shop, steaming milk, chatting with customers, trying to avoid going home to that strange house. Eventually, she started covering up all the mirrors. One day I come home, and every single mirror in the apartment is draped in towels or turned away. That same day, I noticed deep scratches on the bathroom door, gouges that looked like she'd clawed at it, desperate. Her sketchbooks, once filled with lovely drawings, were damaged, pages torn out or crumpled, and the remaining ones covered in strange charcoal scribbles that gave me chills just to look at. That was when I knew she needed help, urgent help. I was planning to confront her the next day, maybe pull her out of it, or if she refused, organize some kind of intervention. But the cruel irony, by the time I finally decided to act, it was too late. That evening, I walked into an apartment thick with a metallic, wet smell heavier than the beef she'd eaten. The lights were off, so I figured she wasn't home. But the moment I hit the switch, what I saw made my blood run cold. Sitting there on the floor of the living room, her once bright face was now a mangled mess. She was cross-legged, clutching a large kitchen knife in one hand, and in the other, a flap of her own skin that she was peeling back from her forehead like a mask. Her raw, bloody flesh glistened, blood dripping down her thighs, and she looked up at me with lips streaked red, whispering, "I need to see who's underneath." I dropped my bag and took a step back, screaming. I bolted into my room, slammed the door, pressed my back against it, shaking all over, clutching my phone. I dialed 911, trying to be calm. I could hear her out there, in the hallway, the scrape of that knife against something, murmuring louder and louder, then suddenly stopping. Then came this low keening sound, like she'd realized what she was doing or felt the pain. I slid down the door into a crouch, clutching my ears with one hand and the phone with the other, just waiting. My heart was pounding. Finally, the cops burst in. I heard the front door shatter, commands being shouted, then terrifying an inhuman snarl, followed by the hurried shuffle of police boots. A second later, I heard shots, loud, sharp. Everything froze, waiting. When I unlocked the door, they'd already zipped her. Rachel, or whatever remained of her face, turned toward me with a hollow, unseeing eye. One cop asked if I was okay. I nodded, but honestly I felt more broken inside than I ever had. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my stuffed keys, phone, and drove straight to my friend Lisa's place across town. She opened her door in pajamas, saw me step back, and pulled me inside. I collapsed on her couch, spilling out the story piece by piece. Lisa didn't say much, she just hugged me, handed me a blanket, and told me everything would be fine. A few days later, after the scene was processed, we went back, me, Lisa, her boyfriend, and the landlord, and in under an hour we packed up all my stuff. The landlord didn't argue. He'd already seen the bloodstains. I moved in with Lisa. Her little room with a twin bed and dresser is tiny, but it's mine, and I started to heal. Sleep was rough, though nightmares about Rachel, bugs crawling out of her mouth, her face splitting open. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, lying there at dawn, wondering what she saw in that jungle, what she brought back. The police called it a psychotic break, blamed the ayahuasca. I read more of these episodes happen, apparently. Maybe that's true. But sometimes at night, I still keep the lights on, lock my door, and check my reflection, just to remind myself it's still me staring back.